Today I'm going to show you how to turn your photos from these to these. I'm going to flick through them real quick so it'll look really cool, but I haven't edited them yet. So kia ora and welcome to the wonderful Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is the first time in 3 years that I haven't been on the run traveling around the globe. So I thought what a wonderful opportunity it would be to sit down and edit a couple of photos from my adventures and show you how to edit your photos at home. So I've chosen a varying degree of photos from all over the world, heaps of different file types taken on heaps of different cameras, different environments, lighting situations, and basically I'm going to run through how I edit photos and how you can just make your photos look a little bit better. Crack open your laptop and get your Lightroom up and running, and then edit along with me if you like. It's feel like a Bob Ross episode. It's great. Start by opening up Lightroom. Go File, New Catalog, and then Save As. Let's call it Photos. And we'll save it under Pictures, or you can save it under whatever you want. You can save it to an external hard drive if you'd like to, if you don't have much space on your computer, but I'm just going to save it to my desktop just for now. So we click Create, and that'll basically close down Lightroom, and then it'll open it up again. It'll open a new catalog. So you can go through and you can find the folder that you're looking for, or you can just go into the folder that you've got your photos on, highlight them all, and then drag them into Lightroom. And then you click Import, give it a second, you come along to your library and you select the photo you want to start with. What is this thing? You go over to your Develop tab, and you basically have all these different lighting controls that you're able to manipulate and change. The way you edit the tones of a photo all depends on how the photo was taken. Sometimes the highlights are super blown out and sometimes the shadows are too dark. Now you are supposed to use the histogram, which is this thing up the top, to get your photos perfect, and it is said that a curve like this is supposed to be perfect, but we don't follow the rules here. We just edit the photos to how we like it. So we'll start by playing with the exposure, and this is all very self-explanatory really. Like each slider isolates a different part of the image that you want to use. So if you want to make if your shadows are too underexposed, you can just pull the shadows up pretty simply. If your highlights are too high, just pull them down. I leave the black slider where it is and never tend to go higher than 0 with this, because it means that your black tones are no longer a pure black color. They're more of a dark gray, and this can make the image look a bit faded, which is fine if that's an effect you want to achieve, but there are better ways to do that. Basically, I want the image to sort of look a little bit flat, and that's okay because we're going to bring the details back later by playing with contrast and other things like that. Once you start to add the details back in, you can also come back and reevaluate these original sliders that you've played with and just tweak them just to get them exactly how you're wanting them to be. The only reason I usually play with the tone curve is if I'm developing a preset. Like, it's pretty annoying. Like, you can put your photos pretty out of whack pretty quick just by playing with it a little bit. For individual photos, the only real thing I can advise is putting a dot like a third of the way down, like there. And all I do is I just pull the tail end up, and I call this adding milk. And this basically just puts like a sort of a faded layer over your entire image, and it gets rid of a lot of unnecessary noise and sort of just adds a milky layer over the top of it. This can also be just as effective going the other way and pulling that tail end just down a little bit, and then that really makes your shadows pop quite a bit. Hue, saturation, and luminance. So this is really good. These sliders basically, instead of isolating different tones, these isolate different colors. So if I want to change the color of my shorts, for example, I could pull the blue slider to the left and make them a little bit more aqua. If I wanted to make them more purpley, I could pull them the other way. But yeah, play around with it, get the colors and the tones to the correct colors and tones that you're wanting, but don't go too overboard with it, otherwise it can look a bit hectic. Control Z to go back, of course. The hue changes what physical color each color is. Saturation controls how intense those colors are, and then luminance controls sort of how light or dark they are. Each slider changes a different aspect of the image in its own way. It can be a little bit like a Rubik's Cube, in the sense that if you change one part of the image or one particular tone of the image, it can change this part of the image, and it sort of, it's important to play around with it until it makes sense to you, and then eventually you'll start to break it down into your own personal way of figuring out how everything works, and then eventually you'll figure it out and you'll be left with a masterpiece at the end. Once you're happy with your image, come down to the bottom, right click on your image, go export, export again. You can put it in a subfolder if you want to categorize your photos, and we'll name it photos. Hit export, and you're good to go. This is a place called Hanua Falls, and so what I would start with is just pump the exposure up, the contrast as well if you like. You can see this red bit here is where it's actually overexposed, so you can trim your highlights and basically choose how you want it to be. I don't want to blow the highlights out because I want to keep what's in the sky. Drop the whites down a bit, pump up the shadows. I don't like to play with the clarity too much because it looks a bit fake after a while, but I'm going to drop the saturation on this a little bit. I'm going to increase the intensity of the saturation in the yellow so that I can get that yellow jacket really standing out in comparison to the rest of the photo. You can really start to manipulate certain colors in the image. So on the hue and saturation, if I wanted to make the yellow jacket a little bit more orange, like you can pull it over to the side and you can make it almost red if you really want to. And then if you don't like it, you can just double click the tab and then it takes it back to 0. Play with the greens as well, so you see the color of the reeds in here. You can change to what level you want the yellows to be at, but I think I want to keep them pretty neutral because I want the yellow jacket to stand out. I've even pumped up the oranges so that the color in through here is seen a bit more. With this image, it's actually taken over 2 seconds, so it's a long exposure, and that's what gives me that silky look in the waterfall. And so I'm actually going to sharpen it a little bit, just so that any small movements in the reeds and stuff aren't sort of too out of focus. But I'll add a little bit of noise reduction, which basically just pulls the pixels together to create less noise in the image, which can make it look a little bit cleaner, a little bit sharper, a little bit nicer. So that's actually pretty straight already. And then we'll just punch in a little bit because there's a lot of negative space, well, not negative space, but space that we don't particularly need. So you can really just enhance your photos really quite easily without even doing much to it. And the best thing about this is there's no right or wrong way to do it. You can just play around with it until you feel like you're happy with it. That was a really bad example. Really, so I could add in like a vignetting to it, which basically puts a blackness around the corners and really focuses on the subject matter in the middle, which is Tyler. What are you doing, dog? Oh, this is my dog. Go, alright. Thank you. So we'll bounce over to Spain, and this is where I met this guy called Sam. And Sam is a very talented skateboarder from, I think, Belgium, maybe? I don't know. Go check him out. He's good. He's a very good skater. He's doing a sick trick over this thing, and so we'll start by pumping up the exposure, turning up the contrast, and then straight away that is instantly better. It was so dark before. Drop the highlights somewhat so that you don't go too bright with that. Pump up the shadows. You can turn the clarity up. I find that the clarity is it can make things look a little bit dirtier almost. So like it sort of makes it a little bit more harsh, which can be cool, but I find it has a huge effect on skin tones, especially. In comparison from that to that, I personally like it to be a little bit softer, especially in the faces. So I never tend to go over 20 with that. What else can I show you? I can show you the clone stamp tool. For example, if you wanted to get rid of this little yogurt carton or whatever's been left on the ground, pick up your rubbish, guys. It doesn't look good, saves us time having to Photoshop it out. Just get the spot edit tool and just literally do circles around it. And then that will pick a spot similar on the image that it thinks will work to cover that spot. It doesn't actually work quite as well as I'm thinking here, so I'll just bring this spot over here to a spot that's more or less similar. And if it's got a feathered edge, it should give a pretty nice effect. See, like you can't even, I can't tell without looking too closely at that. We really want to make it obvious that we're looking at Sam. We'll give the image a focal point. You can bring the vignetting down a little bit. and it's important to never go too overboard with this because it can sort of distract from the image a little bit. You can choose to what degree you want the vignetting in, but I don't think it matters too much as long as it's feathered nicely so that you can't actually tell that there's vignetting there. So I like to feather it all the way to 100 and then pull it out almost to the point where you can't actually tell there's a vignette on the image. I don't know, that's just a personal preference of mine, but you can do it however you feel. I'm going to also bring Sam down a little bit because I want Sam to be in the very center of my image. Once again, making sure that all your lines are straight, so you match the lines up on the grid with the building in the background, or your horizon line, for example, and that can really help out quite dramatically. So there's a grid that automatically pops up to help you out with this. You know, Sam's looking a little bit dark there, he doesn't really pop out as much as I want to, so I might bring the highlights back up a little bit. Yeah, however you think looks good, it looks good. So I'll bring the warmth up just a little bit because it was a hot day. I'm pretty happy with that. So that image is now done. Click export, you're done, just like that. It's so simple. This is a photo I took in Rarotonga, and this is a photo of the stars. This is a little bit different, so this is for like darker situated photos. And so this photo was taken over 15 seconds, which allowed the light to come in from all the stars to be able to capture them. But you can see how the horizon line is not actually straight, and that's because it's a fisheye lens, and so it's warped quite a bit. So we'll start off by fixing that for beginning. You can do that by the lens correction. Click enable corrections, and then you go into whatever type of lens you've got. And it was a Samyang lens, and it wasn't a 50mm, it was a 14mm 2.8, and you make sure you select what type of camera it was taken on as well. And so you can see that it actually straightens out the horizon line as compared to what it was. So it was a little bit weird and warped, and now it's nice and straight. That's good, that's what you want. So we'll come along to the exposure to start with, pump it up to the point where we can actually see the Milky Way, which is quite cool. With star photos, you can really pump the highlights. Don't be afraid to do this because there's so much darkness around all the stars that you kind of want you want them to stand out as much as possible. You pump the contrast up. I find the best way to manipulate star photos if you want it to be a little bit more blue is the best way to do it is with temperature, and that basically does the entire image all at once. If you make it too bright, if you make it too warm, it can look like Mars, but I think somewhere in the middle, and then you pull the pinks up a little bit as well, and that can really make it look, whoa, like we're in the Milky Way, wow. I'm just going to do this quickly. Noise reduction is good for star photos, but at the same time you can actually start to lose stars in here, if that makes sense. Star photos can be pretty grainy, especially if you're shooting them on the go, so always remember to compensate for that. You can see there's actually a little bit there's like a green tinge down here. You can also tell that I'm a little bit warped from this being a fisheye photo. So to fix that somewhat, you can get one of these bad boys, and this, what are these called? It's like a mask layer, and you can control how feathered it is by pulling it up or down. For this, because the green tinge actually doesn't go over the horizon line, we can actually keep it quite slim. You play with the temperature of that mask, and you can also bring the saturation down on it as well. It sort of gets rid of that green tinge that we had, not to the extent that I really want it to be, but you know, that's alright. It's a quick little edit. It's not the best, but it'll do, you know. I could spend hours and hours editing each individual photo, but I'm not going to. We'll jump over to France, and this is a photo of my friend Simon. He's a great man. He lives in the villa. He's the guy that can lick his elbow. Start by pulling up the shadows, and we can drop the highlights to even compensate for that. Whilst it gives it, you're always working with a very flat image until you play with the contrast. Bring the temperature up a little bit, bring the pinks in as well, and then we'll bring the contrast right up. And I'm going to add some milk to this. I might use the brush tool This is an effective little tool, this one. I'm just going to paint over Simon because he's a bit silhouetted here. It's not like the lighting, the photo is not taken well. We'll bring the shadows up, especially. This can sometimes give a whitish sort of glow around wherever you make a mask, so you want to be careful that you don't go too overboard with it. I'm pretty happy with that mask layer. I mean, it's not perfect. I could muck around as much as I want with it and get it to be exactly how I want it, but I can't be bothered. So if you come back into the original image, and then you can actually start to edit the image, remembering that the layer's there, and using that to your advantage. Sometimes you can edit an image too much to the point where the pixels actually just start to fall apart, so you need to keep that in mind. If you separate the highlights and the shadows too much, it can start to really break the image apart, and that's when you can start to tell that the detail is being lost in the image. I mean, worst case scenario, you just make it black and white and you can't even tell. And you can even add in a crop. You can change whatever angle you want to do that on as well in the crop section here. For the next photo, we'll jump over to Venice, and this is actually a wonderful photo that I actually had a friend on Instagram actually painted it for me. So I'm very impressed with how that turned out, Gernot. So thank you very much. I feel blessed to have your artwork of my artwork. It's awesome. It's like Inception of artwork. It's great. It's pretty simple. I mean, this is probably the point in the video where I'd say, hey, go out and buy my presets, but don't buy presets. I mean, you can buy presets, you can do whatever you want, but I find that certain presets only work for certain photos, and I think it's important that you should know how to make your own presets. So, for example, if you wanted to create your own preset, say I like the way that this image looks here, you can right click, you can go develop settings, and then you can either go copy settings, and then you can select all the settings that you want, that you've changed and that you want on the next image. You can go copy, and you go over to another image from a similar lighted situation, for example me in Venice here. I mean, it's not the best, but you know, it somewhat works, and it can make editing your photos a lot quicker. A few adjustments on each, you can make it look really nice. Otherwise, if you want to actually create a preset, you can come along into this, and you can go develop, and you go new preset, and you can name it Venice. Yeah. And then you go create, and then now that's in your presets tab here, which can be helpful to you, maybe. Let's have a look. So this is another photo from Venice. Let's see what happens if we put our Venice preset that we've just made on top of it. Oh yeah, see, that looks pretty nice. It's a little bit blown out in the top, but I mean, look, it works. And then that can be a really simple way to edit a large amount of photos in one go. Oh, my laptop's gonna die. Hold on. Sure. So, in other news, Feijoas, best fruit you can get. If you haven't had a Feijoa, get one. Let's go check out Rome. Okay, so this is a photo of the Colosseum. I might even bring the exposure up and then drop the white to compensate for that. And see, the image at the moment is looking a bit flat. So we'll pump the contrast up on that, and then you sort of get the detail coming back into the bricks here, which looks quite nice in my opinion. So we'll bring the temperature of the image up a little bit, and that really makes it look like the sun is coming through these gaps here, which is quite nice. Straighten the image, of course, whenever you remember it. If you want to make it look like a little bit more ancient Rome, you can drop the saturation on it, make it look a bit more old school. Yeah. So we'll jump over to Ninh in Vietnam, and this is a photo I took of my friend Amelia, and we'll start by bringing up the shadows and then pumping the contrast out a little bit. We'll make it a little bit warmer because it was stinking hot that day actually. So we'll bring the exposure down a little bit, and we'll bring the highlights down so that we retain that information in the sky, because it was a beautiful sunset that night, and we were gutted that we didn't actually get to the top of the mountain to see it, but we went the next morning, so it's fine. Pump the clarity up a little bit just because it brings in some more detail around this like frog marsh stuff here, play with the tone curve a little bit, make it a little bit softer. It sort of makes it not so much harsh detail between the highlights and the lowlights or whatever. We'll pump the saturation up, and we'll on the greens and the oranges, and we could even separate them a little bit more by playing with the HSL and tone curve, but you don't want to play around with it to the point where it starts to mess with the skin tone, because that can that is the first place that I notice that the colors are sort of a little bit off. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that so far. It's just a quick edit. That compared to that, easy, done. Wonderful photo of my little cousin Alfie playing with some bubbles. We can come along to here, pull it up to the point where the red starts to show in the highlights of her hair, and then we'll drop those back down just so that they're not peaking and we're not losing information. We'll chuck the contrast up a little bit, and that already looks quite dramatically better. I'm really happy with that already. We'll make it a little bit warmer just to make it look like it's a bit sunnier than it actually is, and then we'll pull the tone curve up a little bit just to add some milk. Love to add some milk. We can add a little post-crop vignette just to sort of get rid of those highlights that are around by the table here. Yeah, so we can bring that in here, and then we might actually punch in a little bit as well, and then just like that we have a wonderful portrait of my little cousin Alfie. Jump over to Melbourne. So this is Noah, or HXLDT. This is a photo of him walking mysteriously into this forest full of fog, which is pretty cool. I think I'll add a little bit of milk to this to add to the fogginess effect of it. I mean, you can add whatever color you want to it. I think that actually looks quite nice with the trees looking a little bit more red than they need to be, but I mean, it was a redwood forest, I believe, which is quite nice. So yeah, and then you can make the image look colder as well by playing with the temperature, which makes a lot of sense. Or you can make it look warmer by bringing it up. I think we'll keep it cold though, because it was a cold day. We were playing in the snow and stuff, and it was all good fun. Let's jump over to London. This is the Natural History Museum. It's a whale skeleton hanging from the roof. So this was also taken on a fisheye lens. Always remember to chromatically aberrate your photos for whatever lens you... It sort of compensates the image for whatever lens you're using, so it loses that, so you get rid of that distortion that you could have had. I mean, look, it doesn't make it makes a little bit of a difference, I suppose. Yeah, alright, we'll keep it. If you think it looks a bit too orange, you can always play with the temperature, add a little bit of milk, and then you can actually drop the exposure down to compensate for that a little bit as well if you want to, or you can go the other way, which sometimes it works better. But now it's looking a bit too orange at the top, so we'll drop the saturation down and then bring the clarity up as well a little bit, and you can really tell in this image it sort of pulls it apart to the point where it looks quite dirty. Never ever, well, you can if you want, but try not to go too high with your clarity, otherwise it can make your image look a bit like you lose your detail and it's not very nice. In saying all this, there's no real way to edit your photos. You do it to the point where you're happy with it and literally just play around with it. Chuck a little vignette on it. I'm pretty happy with that. I like that. I highly recommend, if you've got a little stopover in Singapore, definitely go check this place out. It's absolutely fantastic. It feels like you're in Avatar or something. Like, you can achieve like a nice flowy effect by taking the photo on a slower shutter speed, and lets the water actually merge itself together, and it can give like a really cool mystic look to your image. I've got a few photos of it. I think I'll edit this one because there was a lot of fluorescent lights at the time, and so it was a little bit difficult to retain the green colors in the trees when there was a blue light shining on it. So I'm going to edit this one because it's got a nice range of greens in here. Start by pulling up the shadows and the exposure a little bit, and then already that looks a little bit better, but it looks a bit fake, it looks a bit flat. So we'll drop the saturation a little bit. We'll drop even the highlights and the whites a bit, but not to the point where I want it to look like it's sort of the waterfall sort of falling into nothing. And we'll make it a little bit warmer and I feel this sort of gives it a more, this can, like, especially when you're editing like neon tones or fluorescent lights, playing with the temperature first is a really good way to make it look a little bit more natural as compared to fluorescent lights and stuff like that. So you can actually, we might actually be able to bring the saturation back up so that we've got those colors in there. I don't like how teal the blues and the roofs are, so we'll change that. What can we change that to? Don't have much option to change it to any specific color, but we can change it, make it a little bit more purpley and less blue, and you can actually also counteract that by bringing the saturation in the blues down a little bit, and also pumping the luminance in the blues up, which makes the waterfall look a bit whiter, standing out in comparison to the rest of the nature that's going on in this photo. I think I'll bring the luminance up in the greens as well, so that the trees stand out a little bit more, and we'll just pump up the greens once again here. And then come along to here, straighten the image. Always make sure the image is straight and centered and whatever else. We'll chuck a little vignette on there, and I mean, you sort of lose those colors that we just spent so long trying to bring back into the greens, but it's not perfect. It could be better, but I mean, that's a quick and easy fix. Once you've edited your photos, post them online and tag me in them, please, so I can see all your wonderful creations. If you want to see more videos like this, drop a comment below. Feel free to check out the rest of my videos as well, because they're all a bit of fun too. Until next time, ka kite, stay safe. See you next time.